Okay, thank you everyone, and thanks for inviting me. And Sandra, you already did the intro, is that what you said?
Not yet, I'll do it. Okay. So guys, today we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Yaish for our Meat Mania. For those of you who were here last week, we're having a theme of Meat Mania because the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of how we treated people in the wrong way. So we wanted to focus on ways how we should treat people. So to give a bit of background of Dr. Yaish and her bio, so she earned her BA in pre-med and psychology from Stern and received her PhD in clinical health psychology from Fairclough.
Yep, you got it.
Graduate School of Psychology at Yeshiva University. Dr. Yaish is the Director of Guidance at Ma'anot and maintains a private practice. She's worked with teens, adults, and the special health needs population of all ages for many years as head counselor both at Camp Hask and Camp Simcha. Dr. Yaish consults and presents workshops for local and national organizations on topics related to mental health, general health, and a specialized needs community. And thank you so much for coming, and whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Now, Sandra, because I was going to move to a place that had a Zoom studio and I'm not near there, I can walk over as we talk, or if you feel comfortable, totally up to you. Do you think you can share my screens as I need? Do you think you can? I don't need them yet, but I figured maybe you could see if that works for you, if possible, or if someone else who's really good at tech might feel comfortable to do that. Okay.
Sandra, you're on mute.
You're on mute, yep.
Okay, let me just host disabled participant screen sharing.
If it's hard, I can totally walk and talk with the community, which is so nice to see how many of you in the middle of the summer are taking this time to work on Midot and improve our character traits and grow together as a people. And so I'll tell you, Sandra gave a great sort of wrap up about who I am and what I'm doing. And one of my favorite inclusive spots, but inclusive perhaps in a way that's not intuitive, is where I work in the summer at Camp Hask. We opened as an exclusively day camp setting this summer for a very small handful of our campers who range all over the spectrum of specialized needs, who happen to be fortunate enough to have a summer home in upstate New York, or you know, be able to drive from perhaps some communities like Muncie, New York, which is about an hour away. But we have about 50 campers out of about 350 that would be here on a regular summer. So that's where I am right now. That's the setting you're seeing in the screen. Just doing one more check that I'm coming through clearly since I'm not in the Zoom studio I thought I would use. Am I coming through okay? Okay, excellent. Yes. Thanks. Oh, Sarah Shockett, I just see you here. Hello. Thank you guys for giving me the fingers up. So I have a screen that maybe if Sandra's able to share, it's a picture of my brother who is 36 years old and has Down syndrome. And if it can, you let me know, Sandra, if that works. And as she works on that, I'll tell you a little bit about who am I to talk about inclusion. The talk will talk a little bit about what is inclusion. We throw that term around in 2020, and sometimes people are like, Rayzel, I'm embarrassed. Like, what is inclusion exactly? What are we saying? We're going to talk about inclusion for people with disabilities. What's a disability? And we're going to talk about in 2020 today what your generation is doing to sort of raise the bar on this topic. And because this is also in the time of the 3 weeks where we're trying to improve character traits, I will say that I'm very excited to be involved in the specialized needs community, because I think that as the world around us tends to sometimes we have all kinds of moral and ethical challenges that sometimes seem to only increase as we become a technically more complicated world. But New York and New Jersey, and by extension the rest of the United States, have truly become leaders in inclusion and services, at least for the world of people with specialized needs. In case you're wondering why I say specialized needs, it's a newer term. There's never a great term that I found people love to talk about the community that I work with pretty intensely. But I kind of think of it like we all have special needs, right? Like, don't we all have special needs, different things that help us work better and do better? But specialized needs sort of makes reference to the fact that some of the needs of the people, say, in Camp Hask that I work with, or perhaps my brother who has Down syndrome, really would benefit from a professional who's tailored to work with those needs, which is why that term has become popular in my community. So I'm a psychologist, a guidance director. I actually met my husband, who's a really nice guy named Yaish, on a Yachad Shabbaton. He subsequently became the director of National Yachad. And I often wonder if I would have been so involved in this world if I had not had a sibling with specialized needs. Kind of not sure. I can't sort of play that game sliding doors, right? Where you could see all the different paths your life could take if you did or did not have those different choices in your life. But I do think that there's a part of me, regardless of whether I had my brother Baruch in my life, that would have still led me to this place. And that is, like, in my early childhood, I was a passionate reader. I read from a very early age. For those of you in the audience who love reading, for those of you who don't, it's all good too. We're all different types of people in the world. But there's so many avenues to reading now, actually, because of inclusive technology, that you could try reading if you haven't done so much yet. All you Rutgers people are doing probably enough reading in any fashion that you find already, especially with Zoom school. And so as an early young reader, I really would like get in one with the lives of the characters I was reading about. And I think it gave me this, I lived their lives. You know, when you finish a series and you don't want to put it down because you don't want it to end, right, guys? Because you kind of wish that you lived there. Oh, Jonathan is helping me out. Thank you so much. So that's the beginning of my little Google Slides. And if you're able to advance to the next slide, you can see a picture of my brother right there. And that young man in the middle of two cute little guys, and those two are my sons. And I like this picture when I talk about inclusion, because this is an example of my brother living a Sunday trip with his nephews and being able to be out in the community. That picture, for anyone who has an eagle eye, that is Jerusalem Pizza in Brooklyn, New York, and Flatbush, New York, if anyone knows that spot. And that picture was taken on a day when we went to pick up my brother from his independent residence that he lives in, to do a little trip. The picture looks awesome, but I do have to tell you that the day wasn't so easy. And this is a good example of why inclusion is complex. He lives a pretty regimented life in his independent home, and he was nervous that we were going to miss prayer service. And he was nervous that if we left his known surroundings, he wouldn't find a proper minyan to pray at that would know him, like him, and help him turn the pages. Because the minyan that he goes to, there's always someone nice, he said, who helps him turn the pages. And as a woman, I was nervous in the middle of Brooklyn. I wasn't sure I would find a minyan that would let me come in and help him turn the pages. And so I was going to ask a nice person if they would help him turn the pages if we went out and stayed out longer past, the time of tefillah. And he had a pretty tense day because of it. And I can tell you a good story at the end of the talk about how it all worked out. What prayer service he got, it was pretty cool. I'll tell you about that. So anyone in this community, I'm just curious, because I can see this is a pretty small group. Are there any of you right now that are currently involved with the population of specialized needs in your lives, or have been involved? A little bit. I see some no's. I see some people whose pictures aren't up. I see Sarah saying yes. Okay, good. I remember that you were pretty involved in your life. So that's awesome. For many communities here in the New York, New Jersey area, people have grown up having Yachad Shabbatons in their shuls or in their schools, and have had the ability to be exposed to a large population of people that wasn't possible 20 years ago. So I was talking about myself being very reading-oriented, people-oriented, and then, lo and behold, in my family, my brother was born when I was around 8, and my nephew, Zev, who's now 19, was born to my older brother, and he has autism. So suddenly in my family, I now have 2 people that I'm caring and loving about that live within my family. So the concepts of inclusion and diversity start to become, way more personal for me now. Sandra, before I go further, anyone who wants to unmute, just remind me when we need to wrap up. When is the usual time frame for the program?
By 9.
Okay, awesome. All right, so now we're talking about my brother, we're talking about his inclusion life, and the next slide that I have up here is a slide that looks at what is the history of inclusion in the United States. I have a little cartoon there, and we'll see if Jonathan's helping me out, we can get it up there. It's the Inclusion and Diversity 101. The topic here is everything you kind of wanted to know or didn't even know that you needed to ask about. United States is truly the leader in inclusion for people with special needs in some ways, and that is because the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, after a lot of advocacy in the 60s and 70s, finally got passed, and that mandates that people with disabilities have freedom, equality, and opportunity to participate fully in public life, which is pretty cool. And there's a little cartoon that I have about clearing a path in the snow for someone in a wheelchair. And what happens there is when we clear the path for the snow, and if you would just shovel the ramp instead of the stairs in this little cartoon, everyone could get in. But if you just shovel the stairs, only the people who can use the stairs can get in. So inclusion is a way of making things, society working to make things comfortable for people with different needs and different abilities. And this became really important. Some of the ways we think about inclusion is in the school setting, inclusion in schooling. This was really the ADA was an expansion of the IDEA. That is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also passed in 1990. And it was an extension of an act that actually was called Education for All Handicapped Children. I left it off my slide, which was passed in the 70s. And this required that students with a disability are provided with a free and appropriate public education tailored to their individual needs. But if you look it up on your computer, if anyone finds this fascinating afterwards, you'll see that really inclusion is considered that people with disabilities should be able to have an inclusive education with people who don't have disabilities. It's interesting. Is that really the most inclusive education for all people? What does that mean? Is that really the goal that we want to have? Is that everyone should just be together in the same classrooms? What happened in the early passing of this law was exactly that. Kids were starting to be mainstreamed into regular classes, but the world around them, the teachers teaching the classes, the staff in the buildings weren't properly trained to really know how to help these students. So you had special ed in a building, which was great because now you had sort of people together and mainstreaming in for gym or putting them in English class or chem class, but the teachers didn't know how to help them. So one could make a case that this perhaps made people feel way less included. If they didn't know what they were doing, they didn't feel good in the classroom, teachers didn't know how to teach them. And this was a challenge in the early days of inclusion. Congress reauthorized the IDEA in 1997, 2004, and actually they recently updated one more time in 2015. The updates to the ADA have been far fewer. Some of the most recent updates involve pools, actually. For those of you who miss swimming, actually I think New Jersey opened up indoor pools again. I don't know if you guys have any pools open to you anywhere, but I think they did. There's been a new addition. I think the most recent addition was in 2015, making sure pools are accessible to all people with different physical needs. So I think that's cool, just to show what they're thinking about in terms of these type of inclusive categories. So that's something very, very cool to know about. And the parts I think are most fascinating is let's think together for a moment about disability definitions. You know, what is a disability? There's two major models of how we can think about disability. So one is like classic, and it jumps up. Oh, I just spotted Shayna Dulitz. That's really cool. Hi. It's really nice to see you. One is a kind of classic model that we think about, which is like the medical model. It's really like looking at a disability as what is sort of your deficit model? What is making you not measure up to the people around you without that sort of deficit? And I'm making it sound a little negative, I guess, because sometimes I do have a bit of a negative thinking about the deficit model. But I know that it's really helpful. So for example, if anyone here benefited from an ISP, an individualized service plan, or an IEP when they were in elementary school, high school, college, if anyone currently benefits, the way that an ISP is usually written is it looks at the person themselves, what they need to learn better, what they need, what they're sort of lacking. Say, I am not a great reader, right? Because I have dyslexia, let's say. So I need to have accommodations made for me where I get to take more time on my test. Perhaps I get to use a dictation software for my essays. Perhaps I get access to all my textbooks on in audio formats, right? We've all heard of those different kinds of accommodations that are allowed if that's part of your plan. We may have friends using those. We may ourselves be using those. And it kind of works, right? Because then you get a chance to have sort of a level playing field to adapt for the deficits that you have. But the other model of disability definition, which is a social constructivist model, is saying, well, shouldn't the world ideally, okay, let's think big, be running in a way where my deficits aren't deficits at all? Now, this is huge. An example of this, if anyone's ever traveled to Martha's Vineyard, I don't know if anyone's ever been there on vacation. Beautiful place. Actually, my neighbor is a doctor at Martha's Vineyard, so he travels from Teaneck, New Jersey to Martha's Vineyard to work with the geriatric population. It's pretty cool. It's a beautiful vacation spot. And I don't know the exact history, but Martha's Vineyard started out as a place where people who are deaf lived there in large numbers. And I forget whether it was a family that grew and got there. I forget the settings. Maybe if anyone has time and wants to look up, I was just going to check it up before I started talking to you. But there was no disability in Martha's Vineyard because almost everyone who was there was deaf and communicated in ways they each understood. Only when Martha's Vineyard started to grow and the population skewed so that being deaf was the minority now in Martha's Vineyard, did it begin to feel like you had a disability in Martha's Vineyard. When everyone around you was deaf and everything was tailored to people who were lacking hearing, everything worked and you didn't feel like you were missing out in that communal space. And that's when Martha's Vineyard had to start to adapt and change to help the deaf population. There's a classic cartoon, and maybe you've seen the book about the fish climbing the tree. It's attributed to Einstein. Some people say it's attributed to others, but there's a quote that says, everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then it will live its whole life believing it is stupid, right? So it's cute and it's sticky and it makes for great memes, and people turned it into a great children's book that perhaps you've seen in different sessions from other people. Because if you take that fish and tell it to climb a tree, it's going to fail tree climbing class. Right now I'm in camp right now with a really young guy who's running our entire tech department. He's probably not even 20. And he, is climbing on poles, splicing wires that he probably shouldn't be doing, but succeeding at every single thing he's fixing. He was given the authority to sort of run our tech and media department this summer when we were only allowed to hire a very skeleton staff here at HASC. And he's just the perfect guy for the job. I mean, he's made everything work in a few short days, pulling camp from nothing. And he could not succeed in high school, in 4 different high schools that he, tried his hand at. But in our camp, he's running our ship in a way where I couldn't even guess at his apparent disability, right, that held him back in high school. And we probably have similar stories in our lives of people that, given the right setting, can be fully included and capable. But the world is big, right, guys? Including everybody and thinking about everybody's needs, which is Sandra's brilliant idea to bring in the topic of inclusion right now as a character refinement, a midot lift. We can always try to grow, but it feels sometimes a little daunting to properly be able to include everyone. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about, since you're all aiming towards, I guess, the work life, you're thinking about your degrees and what you want to do, and you get that question so much asked to you. Oh, what are you studying? What's your major? What are you going to do? Depending on what level you're up to in college right now, or beyond. I thought I'd talk to you about one of the popular ways that we hear about inclusion in your age group is in workplace inclusion and diversity, right? I'm sure you may already be thinking about that. The studies are amazing. Workplaces that are diverse. Diversity means having a representation in your workplace of the community around you. So we tend to think about it in terms of race and gender, but it's also in terms of medical needs or disabilities or ages. Those are other workplace diversity issues. But workplaces that are diverse the statistics are astounding in terms of how much better they do in business, how much more successful they are at attracting customers. Growth rates of businesses who are diverse are really huge. And one would think if we relied on stats alone, that there isn't a company in the world or a workplace setting in the world that wouldn't have diversity or inclusion as priority one. For those of you that are thinking about going into HR, this is going to be a huge aspect of your life discussion, thinking about how to properly create, cultivate, and sustain a diverse workplace. But you know what? The stats on the ground show, despite the hard, cold data that indicates the success of companies that are working on diversity and inclusion, the percentage of women CEOs is still tiny. CEOs with disabilities are way tinier. And diversity just based on race alone, still struggling across almost all sectors. It's measured the most in tech sectors, but across all sectors. So it's just something to think about. It's clearly harder than it looks to sort of create a workplace, or more costly than it seems, or perhaps not a priority for some workplaces, even if they know it might improve their results. What does your generation seem to care about the most, though? And this is so cool. The 2020 generation, and I'm just trying to think where you guys fit. You guys are Generation Z. Did you know that you're Generation Z? I think you are, right? Okay. I think Generation Z is 1995 to 2015. And the millennials are 1980 to 1994 birth dates. So plot yourself in where you land. But both of these generations are saying, we've been talking about diversity for a really long time. Diversity makes a lot of sense to us at this age. We want to reflect the world that we see. In the local upstate paper right here in upstate New York, there was a cover page today, actually, about Cornwall, an upstate community here, where a student gathered 850 signatures to help make Cornwall more sensitive to the needs of their diverse student body, as opposed to being tilted in one direction. But what your generation is saying, diversity is only one thing. You can have the best stats on paper. You could have the most diverse looking workplace, but are we inclusive? Are we creating a culture around these people that we've now hired, cultivated, recruited to actually help them feel successful? And I think this works a lot when thinking about the special needs community. Go back to my model of what happened in schools where we did not have the right teachers around, right? So we can hire everyone, bring them in, but are we helping and supporting them to be successful? So there's a push in your generation to focus on changing the stats from just hard-driven data about numbers and metrics, but to stuff that's harder to measure about ethics, culture, kindness, responsibility, caring. It feels like it could be a little bit endless, but it matches the mantra we believe in as a culture of kindness, caring, and acceptance, and good midos, basic good midos to make someone feel welcome. In fact, corporate sponsorships of products that are tailored to, celebrity sponsorships, of products that are tailored to inclusion, clothing that is meant to be more comfortable to wear for people who have physical disabilities. companies are trying to get celebrity sponsorships of those kind of products to say that's inclusion. Let's make sneakers that everyone can wear. Let's make clothing that, that people can wear. So we're moving away from raw numbers and metrics to a spirit and a feel and a growth style. And this is why I say I'm proud to be part of this world, because who wouldn't want to look back at the end of my life and I'll say, you know what, I was part of something that really changed the world for kindness, that really made the world a better place, that made people come somewhere and feel included. If you're a person whose general style when you see someone is to give them a big smile and to make sure they know you like them and that you're caring about them, what a great way to do this in a workplace setting and to make sure that people feel comfortable. I'm going to pause for just a moment, and maybe what I'll do is at the end I'll email my slides out, Sandra, and anyone who's interested in looking at this further. But there's a bit of I'm going to pause for any questions or comments before I go to just a kind of a little quandary that I've been having about inclusion. Any questions or comments or something anyone wants to unmute and ask? Feel comfortable. It looks like a warm, accepting crowd. Okay. Anything? I'm looking at everybody. Keep going. Yes, guys? Okay. All right. So there's a really cool and challenging brain bend that's going to happen now. Here we are, we're agreeing as a Generation Z, we're going to be not just diverse, we're going to be inclusive. We're not going to do it just because of the success it's going to bring to my business, but we're going to do it because of a higher ethical standard, a social constructivist model of disability where I want to challenge myself. How much as a community can I make people feel comfortable? Why should it all be on that person to sort of change? Why can't we change if we're able to do this? But what happens, and it's been happening uniquely in my special needs world, I want to tell you about something called the inclusivity paradox. You may have come across this in some college classes, but get ready for this. So the more we include somebody, right, perhaps we then end up excluding somebody. It's possible. So an example of this is something that you may not have thought of when you hear about, let's say, charter schools, or us in the Jewish world who argue for vouchers, right, for free private education. Some of our communities have been fighting for that so that people can go to Jewish day schools at less cost, let's say. What happens when you have a charter school? Concept. But you know who gets left out of a charter school? Often people with disabilities, sometimes even people of different races, because you're creating in a charter school sort of like a unique little carved out niche of individuals who can go there. And in so doing that, you're leaving out others who might benefit from that population. This is like a great topic to argue because I could already hear some people in the audience saying, Rayzel, this is impossible. There's no way to succeed. You're always going to be leaving someone out when you're trying to include. So here's what's happening in the special needs world. You're going to think this is wild. New York in particular, because in 1983, there was this amazing expose, which you've probably heard about. For those of you who know of any friends from Staten Island, I make fun of my Staten Island friends because they're the forgotten borough and they're so far away and you have to drive there and there's always traffic and it just seems like a funny place, Staten Island. But they became a little infamous for having the Willowbrook Institution on their grounds. Awesome documentary pieces to watch if you've never seen them. A little horrific also. Geraldo Rivera, actually a Jewish reporter, snuck onto the grounds without permission, hopped a fence, climbed through these expansive grounds, and took a video in 1983 of the Willowbrook Institution. And it was the largest institution in New York for people with specialized needs. And there was a lot of horrible things he saw. In order to change and feed that many people, one of the easy ways to do that was to not clothe anyone. If you didn't have clothing on you, then it wasn't so much to change and wash, right? I could just hose everything down afterwards. If I feed everyone porridge instead of protein that I need to cut, then it could take me much faster to get the food in, right, into your mouth. So I could feed 20 people in the span of time it should take to feed 5, right? And he exposed this, and New York became the leader of inclusion into the community in the world, and it spread out from there. Geraldo Rivera can definitely say to the world that he changed the world. Since that time, that's what started the group homes we hear about, the supportive residences that we hear about, the day hab programs. All those amazing things stem from really that one encounter with Willowbrook. Many Willowbrook residents are actually still alive today, and they have lifetime benefits from New York because there was so much shame about this. New York did not want to lead in being the worst expose ever in the history of special needs, but they switched it, and they really did good by being the leader in the world of inclusion, kindness, and caring for people with special needs. And so there's this pressure because of IDEA and fair access to public education that everyone should be included in some kind of mainstream model. So all of the funding in New Jersey and New York and spreading across the country is being directed to programs that can help clients with specialized needs get jobs. Sounds awesome, right? Getting jobs is, we know, we're dreaming about those jobs. If you have one and you're lucky enough to have one during this COVID era, I mean, wow, you are feeling great. You're bringing in money and it feeds your grown-up identity, and it's awesome. I mean, I can't believe how thankful I am to be working at HASC, and being able to be a private therapist on Zoom also gives me an income. It's awesome. But my particular campers here in my beautiful camp that you're seeing a little bit of through my screen, many of them are severely limited and are not able to really get any kind of classic job. So what's happening to those people? The funding for those less trendy types of inclusion settings is drying up. And so we've had some of the largest funders in the Jewish community, the Ruderman Foundation, for example, which funds programs for all kinds of people with specialized needs, has come to HASC twice and has looked around our camp, our beautiful camp, with people being pushed in wheelchairs and being fed and having every activity tailor-made to their needs. And the only question they have for us is, where is the inclusion? Where is the mainstreaming? Where are the same age high school students that should be working with them? In their mind, this would be a successful model. Our campers sometimes hurt their counselors. We don't like that, but they do. And I can't really have them be in a bunk necessarily with other high school students and get hurt. It would be risky and dangerous. We need to really learn specialized methods of helping them. On a job setting, many of our campers can do it, but many can't. And the Ruderman Foundation has walked out each time. If someone has a connection with them, you can let me know. But we've talked to them. But right now, their goal, their funding goals are to fund inclusive programs, which means programs that are mainstreaming into the community. So we're missing out, and therefore we're not servicing some parts of our population. So it's an inclusivity paradox. The more we're trying to include, suddenly a segment falls out. So something to think about as we challenge ourselves on this midot talk to grow in our character. I have a friend in Israel who runs a farm called Kishorit Farms. They were funded for the past 5-6 years also by many American donors. Kishorit Farms is stunning. Please visit it if you go to Israel, when we ever are allowed to go there again. And if someone's in Israel right now listening to this, lucky you. But if you're not, we would love to go see it. What happened to Kishorit Farms is that people actually live there on the farm. People aren't doing this job as like a chesed necessarily or a kindness. They actually love living there. They live there with their families. Individuals with specialized needs live and work in this farm setting, an expansive, beautiful land. Not all can have jobs because not everyone is able to do a specific job, but everyone has a place and a home and a feeling of belonging. But about 5 years ago, they lost all their funding from American sources because also on Kishorit Farms, there's no inclusion into a broader community of people without specialized needs. It's a tailor-made community for people with. I'm giving you this one piece from my life that's personal to me, but we can think of other places where this happens. And so I just thought it was something unique that your generation can think about, because we are sometimes, in our desire to be inclusive, we forget that we may inadvertently be leaving someone out. The other popular thoughts that are happening now in your generation, I think this is also interesting. How many here, all of us, lived through the Me Too movement, correct? Still going on now. And there was so much excitement at that time that the Me Too movement would allow people to bravely speak up and the thought was that there would be tremendous benefit in the workplace setting specifically, where women and anyone who was feeling that they were being harassed could speak out safely. I don't know how many of you know about this, but the studies are pouring in now even more. It's like 2 years after, 1 year, I think 2 years after that, 1.5 years, I guess, that there is a huge resistance of people to hire. The rates of hiring women became less. People became scared to hire women because of the Me Too movement. It was not the intention of the movement, not at all the goal. The goal was to be inclusive and safe and wrap our social dynamic in a way around individuals who needed some support. And instead, the studies and polling of top business execs and hiring firms is there's been a decline in a desire to hire women, a decline in a desire to have any job that, let's say, would involve travel with cross genders. There's a lack of interest in hiring a diverse staff from a gender perspective. So I think that's kind of an interesting fallout from a desire to also help make the world be a socially more inclusive place. But just because it's hard doesn't mean that we don't stop trying. And when you have the personal model that I have, where I see individuals in my family on a daily or weekly basis who have benefited from those amazing brains, and people like Sarah Shakit out there in the world who are trying to work with Yachad, and Dulitz in her HASC work. These are people who are trying to figure out ways and to exercise their creative talents to make life big and make life great for my brother and nephew. And I hope that in my small way, as I sensitize one more person today on campus, the camper did something that was not great. He threw his counselor's phone across the synagogue and broke the screen cover. Wasn't great. I still don't get this, but another guy sort of high-fived him like, hey, that was cool, man. I was like, what did you just do? That was such a bad behavior. Why would you high-five him right now? And so I had a chance to sort of teach not in a mean way, but in a strong way about how to be more appropriately working with that fellow, so that he would learn that is not necessarily a behavior that's going to help him in life. And we thought about different ways we could handle it next time. When I do things like that, when I create a night activity program here in camp, where everyone can either paint with a brush or paint with a spray gun or paint with their hand or paint with their foot, I'm making the world bigger and making the world more inclusive for those people. So I raised a lot of different topics. I know I tried to do a little bit of an American history, personal lesson, character growth lesson, all in one. But again, I'm going to turn to the floor to see if anyone has any thoughts, questions that this brings up for them that maybe I can help you address. Okay. With that, I'm going to wait another moment. Sandra, I'm going to ask you, do you think it would be something that I can easily do to share my slides that I didn't get to share because I messed up on my half-hour timing, I'm sorry, with the community? Is that something I could send out to you to share?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I'll give it to you in a slide fashion, which I would be happy to share. And I hope I hit the notes that you were hoping to gain from tonight. And I'm proud to be part of this group that's learning and growing together in the middle of the summer, and keep up the great work. And if something pops up to you later, you just have a workplace question or a personal life question, I'm happy to be part of any advice you might need.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk. I really appreciate it. I think we all do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you're muted. Oh, no.
I just realized I was muted. Thank you for being patient with me. I wanted to say that I'm gonna head out, and I wish you all good luck in your learning, growing endeavors, and